The thing that I always tell planners and producers to remind them that when they're looking at a contract from that in-house supplier, that you are not their customer. The customer is the venue, and they are servicing their customer and servicing you on behalf of their customer.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today and to spend the afternoon kicking off this important discussion on the realities of rising costs, contract clauses, and preferred versus exclusive providers. But before we dive in, I want to start with a word that I think might help frame today's conversation: fairness. The word fair seems simple enough, doesn't it, at first glance? But as you know, it can mean very different things. I want it bigger on that one, just so you know. It can mean very different things depending on who you ask. It's subjective. What's fair to one person might not feel fair to another. And what's perceived as fair from a business perspective might differ drastically from a consumer's view. Forgot I have to do this. And that brings us to the heart of today's conversation, the events industry. Like any other, it's a business, one where we all aim to make a profit. But the way we run our businesses, the decisions we make, and the best practices we follow will differ from one organization or business owner to another. This panel is about finding ways to navigate those differences, how we can address, this is great, how we can address best practices, and how we follow, wait a minute, lost myself. How we can navigate differences, how we can address the challenges we're facing, such as rising costs, preferred vendors, tough contract negotiations, while still setting a high standard for the industry, and an excellence ensuring the practices we adopt are both fair and sustainable. So as we explore these issues, I encourage all of us to think critically about how we can influence change in ways that elevate the industry as a whole, where we aim for a standard of best or acceptable practice that fosters growth, collaboration, and fairness, even as we continue to face evolving changes. That said, I want to welcome our panel of experts. Tim Lang, President of Canadian Audiovisual Providers Association and ProShow Audiovisual. Matthew Byrne, founder and president of Byrne Production Services and host of Production Value Matters, the business events podcast. Andrea Carroll, director of experience and production, E=MC² events. And Scott Frankel, president of Animatic Media. Thank you all for agreeing to be part of this today. So I'm going to just take a seat here, and as I am going to arrange myself, we all have the fabulous EventMobi app, and in that app is our session listed on the schedule. Top right-hand corner, there's a Q&A module or a tab, whatever you want to call it. You can, as we're talking in the first two sections, you can post questions that in the last few minutes we will address. There is an upvote button, so if there's one that you really want to see answered, please do use that. I would not typically have my phone on stage, but in order to use this fancy-dancy technology, I'm going to use it. So thank you. Thank you, everyone, and let's just dive in. So for those of you not familiar with CAPPA, it's a non-profit association representing Canadian owners, Canadian-owned audiovisual sound and lighting companies from coast to coast. They engage with the event industry, facilitating government advocacy and creating career awareness. Tim, what prompted you to get involved with CAPPA?
Thanks, Jody. So CAPPA, it's the Canadian Audiovisual Providers Association, was born out of the pandemic when obviously we were having a lot of challenges with the shutdowns. And while the federal government did have labor support programs, AV companies are much bigger than just labor. There's substantial investments in equipment, warehouses, trucks, insurance, a lot of non-labor costs, and those supports were initially not being addressed by government. So a number of us across the country were able to get meetings with the federal and provincial governments. I personally spoke to Minister Freeland's office and talked about the challenges we were having, and they were very sympathetic, but the thing we heard time and time again was, we don't make government policy based on talking to one private business. Where's your industry association? And we did not have one. And so ourselves, together with some of our peer companies from across the country, we got together on some calls and said we need to create an industry association. And so CAPPA was born, and we got it incorporated. We got the association set up. We got some sponsors. We today have about 29 member companies, coast to coast, every province except for New Brunswick and the territories. And we were able to sort of build out what CAPPA would do. There's three main pillars to CAPPA's mission, if you will. First and foremost is government advocacy, being able to talk to government not as one individual business, but being able to represent the industry as AV companies as we're talking to governments of all levels. The second pillar is stakeholder engagement, which is speaking to our clients, which is you, event producers, on topics that are relevant, such as venue contracting and freedom of choice, but also things like immigration policy, if you're thinking about hiring a foreign AV company, and of course, promoting a Buy Canadian message, which is certainly apropos in the current climate. And then our third pillar is career awareness. We're very much a sort of behind-the-scenes industry. If you're not in it, you don't think of it. And so we've been reaching out and partnering with CITT to various post-secondaries across the country to raise awareness of the whole existence of our sector as a career opportunity for the next generation of workers that might come and work for our members.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for joining us. Matthew, how do you help clients understand the difference between the services you provide as an AV producer or a production company and that of an internal or in-house AV rental company? Additionally, how does this help clients save money and uncover potential hidden costs, such as displacement fees?
So hi, everybody. The simple answer is that we try to advise clients on what the financial impact would be of using an outside partner versus using in-house suppliers. It sometimes comes down to, as you said, uncovering those hidden fees, understanding how they are contracting and what questions to ask, and understanding the economic push of their dollar. And that, the simplest rule being that, and there's some debate that we had about the certain percentage, but essentially at least 25 cents of every dollar you spend for an in-house supplier, and I don't want to brush the entire in-house industry with this brush, but essentially 25 cents for every dollar goes to fees, commissions, and hidden back-end deals. And so when using a third party or outside supplier or partner, your dollar goes a lot further. Your dollar is actually spent on production and on the things that you're trying to get out of the results and outputs of your event, versus bearing that, in some cases, 50 cents on every dollar, but on average about 25 cents on every dollar.
And where do those fees go?
They go to commissions, they go to offsetting CapEx, but commissions is the biggest part of that. These deals are made with the venue and that particular supplier to ensure that the house gets their bet. It's a thing that I always tell planners and producers, to remind them that when they're looking at a contract from that in-house supplier, that you are not their customer. The customer is the venue, and they are servicing their customer and servicing you on behalf of their customer, but really their financial incentives are really tied to the house and the commissions that they're giving. So what that means is, as I said, at least 25 cents of every single dollar you spend as an organization goes towards that and not towards your stage production or the quality of the work that you get done.
Perfect. Thank you. Next up, Andrea, at your role at EMC squared. EMC squared, I said that right, that's right, E equals MC squared, and previously with Rogers Place. How would you describe your relationship with preferred vendors, and what were the expectations for use of those preferred vendors?
Yeah, I think for equals MC squared events, our idea of our preferred vendors, our partners, which we've said a couple of times this weekend. It's really important. We use people that we trust, that we know that when I put my name out there and say, I'm going to vouch for this company, that you're going to get delivered as our clients what your expectations are and what we want to deliver for you and your event. And part of that is when we have our partners, obviously that we get really good relationships going. We do a lot of events with those partners. And so we do end up negotiating discount rates with them. We pass those along to our clients. And that is a best practice that we'll do with all of our preferred vendors, and our clients benefit from that. There isn't, we don't keep that. We don't, it's not going back to a different person. That is getting directly from us to our clients in that preferred vendor relationship. There's another version of a preferred vendor where, yes, you are being supplied a few different options, but there could be monetary compensations going on behind the scenes. But so there's a couple of different ways that people in the industry sort of describe a preferred vendor. In both Rogers Place and with E=MC² events, I have always lived to be true to the fact that when we are using a preferred vendor, it's because we have trust, we have built a relationship, and I know that they're going to deliver what we're telling you that they're going to do for you.
Great. Thank you. So all about partnership. Your remarks kind of shed a new light on the relationship between venue, preferred vendor, and client for some of the audience members who are newer to the industry. That might be very helpful. Scott, you had a lot of great information during your session yesterday. Don't sign that contract. What's your number one tip that you can give this audience today to avoid upcharges from in-house providers when the client chooses another vendor?
Well, there's quite a few, actually. And, you started off talking about, you used the term fairness. I also want to add in the term transparency. Because I think that's what happens is that you don't always have all the information. And let's face it, we've had a lot of new people come into this industry over the last couple of years. So it's not your fault if you don't know to ask all the questions. So, and what I'm talking about to avoid upcharges is that when you get a contract from a venue, any venue, there's going to be things in there that I talked about yesterday in a little more detail, but you need to ask questions. It has to make sense to you. So a lot of people don't really read through all of the contract stuff, right? And you have to do that. You're a business person. You're controlling significant budgets. So when you get to the audiovisual section and the rigging and electric and all of those technical things, you have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence by asking to be put in touch with if there are exclusive providers for things like rigging, electric, internet, and so on. When you do that site inspection, before you sign that contract, which is what I was talking about yesterday, you need to make sure that you're getting pricing for everything that goes with it. So you could really see in the big picture what your budget is, because quite frankly, you don't know. You can't base it on the fact that you paid X thousands of dollars last year for rigging at a different venue, because that doesn't mean that this venue is going to have the same pricing structure. So you could literally be costing yourself tens of thousands of dollars if you don't get that information. So you want to get those quotes up front. You want to get in touch with the in-house and exclusive provider just to get the pricing, and then you'll have the clear picture. And then you could most likely avoid upcharges, or maybe they're not upcharges, maybe they were just unexpected charges that you didn't know about when you signed.
Great, thank you. So yesterday afternoon, the first block of the breakout sessions, ILEA hosted something to talk about, and it was about this subject matter here. What we did was a couple of our board members sat in on those sessions and they recorded some of the questions. And we're gonna do this next section based on those questions, those burning questions that came up in that conversation. And I'm gonna let the panel kind of self-identify who's gonna answer that question so that we get a good voice, a broader voice. So we might have more than one response here. So it was announced yesterday that Canada has been given a blessed 30-day reprieve on the Trump-imposed 25% tariffs. But how has this current economic state going to affect pricing in the AV service arena, since we've already seen a remarkable increase in 2020?
Sure. So speaking from a strictly AV supplier standpoint, which is different from the overall event standpoint, we don't think there would be a lot of direct impact, but there would be a lot of indirect impact. So direct impact might be if we're buying equipment to increase our inventory and it's coming out of the United States, that might have an impact. We actually, in anticipation of tariffs at ProShow, we looked ahead to our whole year's capital investment plan and rushed everything that was coming out of the US and got it in January. So that's not really going to be an issue for us, but lots of product comes from Europe or Asia. So it's a direct impact, but it's not a huge one. The bigger impact will be general price inflation, which is not so much with AV in and of itself. It's the fact that everything will get more expensive, everything at the grocery store, fuel, you name it. And as inflation goes up, all of our employees, and labor is by far the biggest cost for every AV vendor in the world, they are going to need more money because of inflation. We're going to have to pay more money, and we will therefore have to charge more money. Also, things like transportation costs will go up, and the Canadian dollar will go down. And that's a big one. A lot of sub-rentals, a lot of equipment purchases, even if the product is not from the US, it's priced in US dollars. So as the Canadian dollar weakens, that drives up inflation, and that'll have an inflationary effect on our pricing as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add the sort of broader economic factors. So when I don't know if anybody read what the counter tariffs on the first $30 billion was going to be for the Canadian government. There was a very long list that was very, very boring to read, but important. And one of the things that will be greatly affected if we do the counter tariffs, this is a lot of ifs, so nobody panic, is food and beverage. Food and beverage is going to be massively impacted because every single thing on that list was either processed raw materials. We, as an economic system, we cut down trees, we send them to the US, they make it into plywood, and then that plywood comes back to Canada in the form of a Home Depot order. But processed and packaged foods, raw foods that come out of the United States, oranges and various things, and alcohol, liquor, and wine, all of your food and beverage costs go up instantly overnight at 25% higher. And just to reemphasize what Tim said, that all has knock-on economic effects for labor, for general inflation. And then the biggest thing that I think would hit everybody, no matter whether you're in AV or not, or production, is the demand, right? The demand of the market. Like we all sell, like whether you're, I'm assuming there's a lot of agency and or third-party planners in this audience, or suppliers, or whatever it might be. The demand for events would naturally diminish the same way that it did in the 2008 financial crisis. So whenever we have anything like that happen to our economy, that is a reality. That the parties get smaller, the audience reduces by 10 to 15%, and your cost for feeding them just went up 25%. So those are economic factors that we all have to think about.
Great, thank you for that. Anything else to add? So what is the major cost component for companies delivering AV production services and equipment rentals?
I mean, it's still, as Tim said, it's labor. Labor is the biggest contributing factor, right? And that will continue to rise. That's a rise that we saw post-pandemic. Not to be like, I'm an amateur economist, so please don't take all of this as, go find real financial advice. But historically, whenever there's been some major global crisis like that, the consequence of the labor pool either being diminished like we experienced in this market, which is a lot of people left. I think the statistic is 70% of the workforce is under 5 years of experience, which means that they joined this market in various industries after the pandemic. And so we lost a bunch of people. There's less volume of people. There's less skill. Like CITT is a perfect example of where that investment needs to be made. But what is a natural progression is that the workforce diminishes and the cost for that workforce goes up. And so even without a tariff crisis or a silly trade war, like that will continue to mount over the next few years.
Yeah, and if I could add in, labor is one of those things, it's the least flexible element that we have. Nobody's really making money on labor, right? And you don't want to skimp on your labor. You want good labor there, right? And these people are hard workers, and they work long hours, and they're very skilled people. You know, on equipment, there might be some flexibility on equipment, right? You need to get that flexibility so you could afford to pay the people that deserve to be paid, where there is more flexibility probably on equipment.
And I think too, from the planner perspective, is to be cognizant of that this is, you know, the reality that we're living in, and be very smart about how you're working with your production and AV companies on how you're utilizing labor. How can you build your schedule? How can you build out your program, your load in, all of the things that go and contribute to that labor cost so that you're being as efficient as possible.
Great. So building on that, how do the difference in markets affect overall pricing? For example, Edmonton versus Calgary. If we were to do this conference in Calgary, would we be looking at the same bill?
I can speak to that. Maybe I'll talk a bit more generally, Western Canada versus Central or Eastern Canada, you know, Ontario and Quebec. There's two major, it certainly costs more money to do the same event in Vancouver than it does in Toronto. You know, how much more? It might be 15% more, it might be 25% more, but it's more. And there's there's two major things that drive that difference. The first is labor cost, which relates to the cost of living in the city. It's more expensive to live in Vancouver than it is in Edmonton or in many other cities. So therefore, the staff have to be paid more. If the staff have to be paid more, that means you have to charge more. So that's the number one driver, is especially since labor is the biggest expense on any event for any AV company. That's the number one driver. The second driver in Western Canada is related to our relative geographic isolation. If you're an AV company in Calgary or Edmonton or Vancouver and you don't own the piece of equipment that you need, you're probably going to have to bring it in from Toronto or Las Vegas or somewhere far away where it's going to take 4 or 5 days on a truck, or you have to air freight it. And it's not uncommon for us to have to spend more money on the shipping for that product than we're actually paying in rent on the product. That means we have to charge more for that product in Vancouver than you would pay for that product in Toronto, where Nationwide, which is the biggest North American sub-rental supplier, they have a location in Toronto. It's a lot easier, and it's just a much huger market. Like, the market in Toronto is many multiples bigger than the market in Vancouver, which is bigger than the market in Calgary, which is bigger than the market in Edmonton. So as you move downstream in market size, that becomes amplified. So I would say those are the two biggest challenges, is again, labor cost and the geographic isolation.
Yeah, it becomes a supply and demand equation, which, you know, everybody remembers high school economics, that, you know, low supply, high demand equals a higher price. You know, there are other market dynamics that happen in those larger scale markets, like the Vegases, the LAs, the Toronto, and it's another dimension of supply and demand, where those prices can escalate just because of the sheer volume of business that's being done in a particular market. You know, I have many tales of a client doing a show in Toronto for X amount, and then we do the exact same show in LA, and they're very surprised that it's A, US dollar, and B, twice the cost, just because it's LA and everything's more expensive in LA. These are all factors that come into it.
And I imagine, Scott, you had the same dynamic in the United States between LA and New York.
Yeah, there's absolutely cities that you just know you got to tell the client. I've got a client I know, they're always on a limited budget, always. And they wanted to, you know, they said, what do you think about Chicago? I'm like, no. I mean,
that would be my favorite kind of client, unlimited client. I'm a corporate planner, so I always have a limit, but
I think it gets cold in Chicago too.
Yeah, and I think the practical tool for us is, if you have an event that travels around the country or to different places, is to be cognizant of that. The first thing you can do is look at what those sort of cost of living. It's not going to give you a perfect science and a perfect math, but you can kind of gauge, hey, if I'm taking this conference to this city next year, I better start planning my budget to accommodate what that market value is going to be.
that makes sense. So One of the questions that came up multiple times in yesterday's, both sessions actually, is why are the contracts so long? and general for venues and other suppliers. And do you have any tips that you can give the planners on how to understand these contracts better?
I think maybe I'll start. Coming from a venue in one of my past lives, I think that it is vague for a couple of things. One, because sometimes you're planning for a number of different things. There's a blanket contract that will service a lot of different events. It's also vague because it helps with interpretation of legal matters when they come up later. And if there is room for interpretation, that's always a good thing for the venue. I think that when we are talking about tips and tricks on what to do, a couple of things. Obviously, the one that we always hear of, hire a lawyer or contract somebody that can read through that contract with you and help you understand what it is. The other thing that I like to say as well is bring in a subject matter expert. There's a couple of pages that are going to be legalese that you'll want someone to, but for the most part, a lot of that contract is going to be the description of the services that are going to be provided. So get yourself a production manager, event planners are get yourself a production manager, have them at the table before you sign anything that has to do with audiovisual, and let them walk through that with you.
Yeah, and just more tips to go on that. So I know that there is a perception or there is a practice in the industry are purposely written in such a way to make it confusing, cumbersome, and unclear. I can speak to people, members of the CAVPA, of which I am a member as well, that not that we have an official standard, but we do have an official practice of make it clear, make it exactly clear and easy to read. So the first tip is to demand that from whatever client provider that you're using, and simply to ask questions. I think that there is a tendency in this market and to practitioners in this industry to take things at face value and not delve into it. And when they are confronted with something they don't understand, a lot of the times it is nerves. I don't feel the confidence to be able to kick this back. I've been told by 16 people in suits from the venue that, oh, don't worry, it's fine. It'll be great. Just sign the contract. And the answer to that question is no. I have every right to ask any question about any clause on this. We do this all the time. Clients come to us and look at our contracts, which is not egregiously long, but it does have the proper things to ensure our protection, the protection of those that work for us, and our client, and the venue, and all of our partners. And we go through it not line by line, but we take them through that contract. We have a proposal review process in all of our sales efforts so that we know that our client is exactly clear as to what they are signing. Now, there are people out there who don't do that. They are trying to push you to sign a contract. And I think you had a story while we were chatting about those secondary lists or those secondary clauses that refer to other agreements. You got to ask for those agreements, right?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest takeaways I can tell you is because they will refer to, this is your venue contract, right? They are putting language in there talking about production law guidelines or third-party vendors, and it'll say you could bring in your outside AV as long as they, pay attention to the standards or these things. But you're signing that venue contract, agreeing to the subtext that you have not yet seen. You have to see it. That's the transparency I was talking about. And to Andrea's point about hiring a lawyer, production manager, I totally agree with that thinking. However, don't let the contract stress you out. Learn what it is. Once you've learned what it is, you will not need to go to that person every time because it'll make sense. It'll be familiar to you that it's the same every time, or it should be the same every time. So you'll be teaching yourself, and then if there's something you don't understand, then you could reach out to somebody for some help. But you could do this. My clients that have been with me for years, they do it themselves now because they've learned. So it's not that it should not be that concerning to you. You could learn this.
Yeah, that's so true, and it will become muscle memory, right? And that's it. Once you've done it enough times, you won't. That minimizes it, and that muscle memory will be there, and you know what to look for, and to say, okay, yep, I'm going to flag this. I'm going to ask these questions.
Mm-hmm. Even me, like I'm 30 plus years experience. But I've been a corporate planner, and I've had a legal team and a procurement team behind me where I can ask some of the questions. But I also demanded of the vendors or the venues that I'm using, and I say, hey, I don't know what that is. Tell me what that is. Why do I need that? What's that charge for? Where's this line item coming from? What's in it for me? My mantra from back when I was 35. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask those questions. I think that's your job as a planner and your responsibility as a professional to understand it and to know it. It's great. So we're coming up to the end here. Let's see what we've got on our app. And of course, it went to sleep right now. Let's see if it's going to recognize my face or not. Come on. Hello. Hello. Nope, it doesn't know me today. There we go. I got to keep these two things away, otherwise there's going to be a loud screech. So the number one question, which I think we've kind of addressed, but maybe we can add some more context here, is what has caused the steep increase in AV prices, and why have planner rates not necessarily risen accordingly?
I can speak to that. It's the same reasons that everything is more expensive is the reasons that AV is more expensive. We talked about labor. The number one cost in AV is labor. On the typical quote that we do, labor is roughly 50% of the bill. Labor costs have gone up dramatically, particularly post-pandemic. Our industry, we lost a significant portion of the workforce. It varies by region, but 40-50% of the workforce disappeared completely and never came back. And so those that remain, supply and demand, commanded a lot more money, or they also would not work for you. They need to be paid more, they want to work less, they want better benefits, and there's more competition because there's less qualified technicians for the same or more work. So and those costs have to be passed on. So that's the number one driver. And then the other secondary drivers are the Canadian dollar. Everything that we buy is 20 to 40% more expensive than it used to be. Some of that's general price inflation, some of it's specific to the Canadian dollar. The freight cost, transportation is generally our number 3 expense. It's labor, then equipment, then transportation, which also includes air transportation. Due to the labor issues, we constantly are flying crew unrecovered, like not billed to the client, but we're constantly flying crew between our offices to fill in the labor gaps. The cost of flights and hotels is double what it was in 2019. That all has to be built into our costs. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't lose money as a business. We have to actually operate in the black or we would not be in business. And so all of those input costs have to be passed on in our pricing. When I think that's true in many industries, but I think it's just more pronounced in AV because of the labor market situation.
And as for the fees for meeting planners, I think that was the second part of the question. Yeah, you haven't risen prices and you probably should. That's the short answer. You know what I mean?
And we did
read
talk
my
about
mind,
that yesterday.
Matthew.
What's that?
We talked
I said
about that.
you read my mind, but I think part of it is that, even though we're 5 years on, I think that there's still a bit of hesitancy that, this might all go away tomorrow. So we need to be competitive. We need to make sure that we are, in fair market value in our communities to make sure that we're winning some of this business. But
yeah, I mean, my point is, though, that your job as an event producer, planner, professional is not to set price. That is not your job. Your job is to guide your clients in the market. They don't do this. You do, right? They manufacture chips. They do cosmetics. They sell cars for a living. The people in this room are event professionals. We are the experts. And so the value you give is how you guide a potential client on how to navigate this market. And so I think you're doing a disservice if you go to a client and say, don't worry, I'll make it cheaper for you. That's not guidance. That's being foolish and not telling them the truth. Be transparent and open. And so when the meeting planner compensation or fees have not gone up, and my immediate response is because you haven't raised your fees, you're not helping. You're not helping your client. You're not helping yourself. You're not helping the market. You need to do that.
Great. Thank you. So everyone,
Sorry,
raise
got
your
a little
prices.
ranty there.
Rant complete. So the next number one question, actually, I guess it would be number 3. Where do you see planners overpaying based on the room usage and agenda hours?
I think I see where you're going with the question.
Yeah.
And I can see the number one area, and I see this every week this comes up, unnecessary waste of money on labor. We talked about labor is the biggest thing, so you want to be smart with your event plan so that you're not causing more labor to be needed than is necessary to execute a great event. And what we see all the time is the venue was not booked the day before for the setup, or 2 days before if it's a really large event. And this means now all of a sudden, instead of having a 8 or 10 hour setup day and a 10 or 12 hour show and strike day, now you have a 16-hour day. The setup has to start at 2 in the morning. Most companies have overnight labor policies where you pay automatic double time overnight. And on top of that, you now have a ton of double time at the back end of the day. Also, your crew are tired. They're not working as fast because they started at 2 in the morning, and they're now on hour 14 by the time you actually have the CEO or your chair on stage for the event. And it is so unnecessary. And typically, the cost of the AV, the lighting, all of the suppliers that have those extra charges because the venue wasn't available the day before for setup, the cost of that is usually way more than it would have been to just pay for the venue the day before. Usually it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times more than what the rental cost would have been to book that room 1 day earlier or even half a day earlier if it's a smaller event. It's a real missed opportunity to manage client budgets that setup time and access to the venue for setup isn't being considered at the time of venue booking.
And I think another aspect to it is to be smart about how you're utilizing your time. And an example is if your budget and the labor is what the labor is you might need to shorten your program a little bit, or you might, while you're working with your client, be cognizant of transitions so that you're timing it out. And if it's an 8-hour program that you're scheduling, look at what that's going to do for your labor. What time do you have to start in the day? What time are you ending in the day? And you might have to go back to a client and say, hey, we got to tweak this a little bit to make it work for our budget.
Yeah, and also make sure you're using the rooms efficiently. Don't just because somebody at a meeting, we're going to have an event, we're going to have a conference, and we're going to have a main room and 4 breakout tracks. You want to build a program so you're using as little AV as you can and you're maximizing the costs for everything. I've got some planners I work with. I love them to death, but maybe they're not the best. I talk to them. I look at the schedule and we say, maybe you could move this session into this room. Or maybe, if you really have to, use a general session room. Some clients are using it for a keynote in the morning. Make it a track room, stanchion off the chairs in the back to force everybody forward. So just be creative in how you're using the space and the labor.
Great. Thank you. Another hot tip, find out if it is a union shop. And if it is a union shop, make sure you're working around those rules and those guidelines. Because if you book an 8-hour show and you have like an hour set up in the morning or rehearsals or something, you're going to go over. You're going to go over and you're going to be paying, what is it, double time and a half, something?
Time and a half until it becomes double time.
Yeah.
And then, and funnily enough, I don't know if anybody knows this, when you go into double time, until you give, is it a whole 8 hours or at exactly 24 hours, depending on the agreement.
If you're in Chicago.
Yeah. So there are some times when you'll push somebody into double time, and then they'll continue in double time until you can give them a sufficient break. And that can be at least 8 hours, if not up to 24 hours. So, those are really important rules to remember when you're doing your labor allocation. And the only other caution I'll give, just because I started speaking and now I can't stop myself, is the other side of the cost-saving equation for labor is not an overall reduction of, can we do this thing that's supposed to take 5 people and do it with 4? Or 3 or 2, which seems to be a knee-jerk reaction. Over 25 years in my career, I cannot tell you how many times I've had to say, do we really need a video engineer for this? It's like, yeah, because nothing's going to get on your screen. So it's not necessarily about trying to do more with less. It's about being strategic. To your point, it's really about programming stages and not just filling rooms. And it's about being smart about your loading schedule and doing that cost analysis of, it's going to cost us $5,000 for that extra day, and we're going to have to shift some labor over here, but it'll the value we'll get out of that for how we treat our executives when they walk in and they want to rehearse right now with fresh bodies who are focused on this and not going, well, thank God I finished putting up the truss, now let's get to rehearsal. That it just doesn't work.
Some non-labor related ideas too is if you're on a multi-day and negotiate some of the equipment for a 1 day versus a 3 day. Look at your contract, and if they're charging you for 3 days worth of equipment, have the conversation. Can that be a 1 day rental on this product, right? So there are other ways that we can also negotiate and look at your cost savings in a more strategic way as well, not just in labor, but also in the products that you are paying to rent.
If I could just go, and one other thing, we talked about, penalties, right? Because long days, overtime, things like that. One of the number one mistakes I see people making is on meal penalties or breaks. We'll do general sessions. They'll put a whole full day in a general session room, and then they'll expect the crew to work through lunch for rehearsals for another session. So just think about that. You have to think about the breaks, or you're going to be in a meal penalty situation similar to the overtime. And the last point I just wanted to make on going backwards on the getting the room for setup the day before as opposed to paying overnight setup. It's a negotiation. You should be looking at the big picture here, because maybe there are things that you might not normally think about that you could put into play, like maybe you have another program that you could put in that same venue later on that year, or sign a 2-year contract if they give you that setup day for free possibly. So there's always ways to think about what could I offer to the venue they'll reciprocate to me, that will really save me real dollars.
And I think already a precedent is most venues will give you a setup day at maybe 50%. Sure. And you don't need that much time for the breakout room, so don't rent all the rooms a day ahead. Just do your big room, right? I
just did an event in New York City at the New York Hilton, and setup day was $15,000 for just setup. No show, no nothing. I mean, a significant budget for most people.
Yeah. Absolutely. The only thing that I just wanted to underline in what you both were saying is that in negotiation is ask. There is absolutely no harm in asking. Like, can I have the day before? What is it going to cost? Ask the questions. If you don't ask the questions, you will never know. And specifically with day rate pricing, it's very common in the industry, especially on AV, for 1 day weeks or 3 day weeks, or something like. I have seen, I swear to God, I did a lighting quote from somebody that they were like a 9 day week because they were including their sub rental days in that. And I was like, and then I laughed and I walked out the room. But I asked like, why is it 9 days? Can you do this at a 3 day week? Can you do this thing, which I know is a gigantic, and it's very technical knowledge. I know you're only getting a 1 day rate on anyway. And I asked the questions, and we cut that budget by 3/4. And so
That's
asking
impressive.
the question is the most powerful tool you have.
We just have just over a minute left, so I'm going to let's round it out with this question, which is rising in the queue here. Is there a way around exclusivity at a venue? And do you even want to do that? Would you recommend it?
So I'll say it's important to understand the difference between multiple services offered by the same vendor in a venue, because often what you'll have is exclusivity for power, internet, and rigging, which have to be exclusive because they're literally built into the venue. There's no way to get around that. But when it comes to sound, video, lighting, AV services, I'm not aware of a single venue in the entire country where that service is exclusive. It's preferred. And if you use the in-house vendor, of course, the venue loves that because they get their big commission back from that vendor, but it's not exclusive. The power, internet, and rigging are. And so by making sure that you negotiate the price that you're going to pay for the power, internet, and rigging before you sign the venue contract, so that doesn't get used as a tool to penalize you for using an external vendor, that's how you can control it.
And just to be clear about some definitions here. So exclusive means exclusive to supply an asset. So to Tim's point, and I always advise clients, you're not trying to get them to be non-exclusive for rigging and power. It's like going into your house. If I went to your house and I started nailing pictures to the wall and plugging stuff into your house, you'd have an issue, and you should. And so exclusive of use of assets. So if I am that in-house vendor, I built it into the building, it is my equipment, I have exclusive use over it and exclusive power. There is no such thing as exclusive for audiovisual services or anything like that. That is a term called preferred. And preferred has two general definitions. One that you mentioned, AJ, which is I prefer using this vendor because they're good people and I can vouch for their work. And then preferred is sometimes used as a euphemism for they give me commission. And preferred means financial arrangement. And again, going back to the biggest lesson, ask the question. Is this preferred because they are the best you think the world can provide? Or is this preferred because they pay you commission? Okay.
So I hope this conversation was valuable. We got through some of the questions in the app. Thank you very much. We'll leave those questions in the app, and maybe we can get some of these guys to respond to them in messaging or something. I'm not sure how we could do that, but thank you very much for your time. Thank you all for joining us and traveling from that was quite the trip, but all of you had quite the trip. So thank you again. And
I love you, Canada.
Production Value Matters, the Business Events Podcast, is brought to you by Burn Production Services. To learn more about Burn Production Services and how we can achieve your business goals with meaningful event designs and elevated production value, head over to burnproductionservices.com. Thanks for listening.